Okay, all right. So this one is solve the zeros algebraically. So it says here zero. So I need you to remember that the other potential questions with the same exact solutions basically is when they ask for zeros, it's the same thing. And when they ask for the word solutions, so solve for the solutions or the roots or the x-intercepts. So that's the same exact steps that you will have to do to find all these other terms. Okay, they mean the same thing. Now, since we're just only solving this algebraically, we don't really need to graph it, but it's important to also visually see it so that you know what method you're going to use. So for instance, if this is your graph, okay, if this is your graph, okay, do we have x-intercepts in this graph? Yes, we do. So this one right here and that one. So if you know that you have x-intercepts, then you can potentially use the AC method where you will find two factors that will multiply to AC and will add to B. However, if your graph looks like this, okay, if your graph looks like this, as you can see, it did not even touch the x-axis, right? So therefore, you do not have real, so when I say real, like real number x-intercepts, because it did not even touch the x-axis. So in this case, if you have something like this, you should probably just use the quadratic formula because that would be a lot easier to do. Sometimes this one you cannot also use AC method because the numbers are the answers are not whole numbers or not rational, not fraction type, and they're like decimal. So that would be the best thing to do with that would just be using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is a lot easier because whether you can factor it or not, it's always a go-to solution anyway. So in this case, we will use quadratic formula. Okay. So let me write the quadratic formula here. So to find the x, it's negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right. So again, if you can factor it, you go ahead. Now, if you cannot think of any two factors that will satisfy the equation, then you can always go to the quadratic formula because it will always solve it correctly, assuming you're entering your numbers correctly. Okay. All right. So when we're finding for zeros or solution of or roots, this f of x, that's your y. Basically, you set that one equal to 0. So I'm gonna copy that here, x minus 15 plus x plus 63. Okay, so this is 0 equals, I'm going to distribute this so that we can write it in standard form. So negative 15x plus x squared plus 63. I'm going to arrange this so that it is in standard form. So that means we want x squared and x's and then constants. So this is going to be x squared minus 15x plus 63. So what that means is that your a is 1. This is the coefficient of your x squared. Your b is negative 15. That's the coefficient of your x. And then c is 63, which is the constant. Okay, we will substitute that into this formula right there. So we'll say x equals negative b. So that means negative of negative 15. That's going to be positive 15 plus or minus square root of negative 15 squared. So maybe you can put that in your calculator. Now be careful when you do negative 15 squared. Do not do it like this. You should do it negative 15 in parentheses squared so that you're also squaring the negative part of the number. So negative 15 squared, that should be equal to 225 minus 4 times A is 1 times C is 63. All right, all over 2 times 1. Okay, so x equals 15 plus or minus 225 minus, I don't know what 63, 63 times 4, that's 240, 252, I think. Is that right? 60 times 240 plus 12. Okay, all over 2. Okay, so x equals 15 plus or minus square root of 225 minus 252. So that's gotta be negative 27, right? So negative 27 all over 2. Now take the square root of negative 27. So I'm gonna continue that here. Okay, I'm gonna use a different color. Okay, so I'm gonna continue that here. Uh, so x equals 15 plus or minus. So negative 27. So remember, that's not a perfect square and it also has a negative. So there will be an I that will come out. So that's the same as negative 9 times negative 9 times square root of 3, right? Over 27. So I just factored out negative 27 because I want you to see what's going to come out next. Okay. So this is 15 plus or minus. Square root of negative 9 is 3i, correct? Because 9 is a perfect square. Then you have that negative inside of the square root sign. And then square root of 3 all over 2. Okay. So you can write it like this, but I think normally they want the I on the outside after all the numbers. So you can write it as x equals 15 plus or minus 3 square root of 3 and then I. Make sure the I is not inside the radical sign all over 2. So you still have two answers, okay? So what do I mean by that? The first one, I'm going to call it x sub 1 is the 15 plus, see, plus or minus? So plus 3 square root of 3i over 2. And then the second one I'm going to call x sub 2 will be 15 minus 3 square root of 3i over 2. Exactly the same except that one is a plus, one is a minus. So in any case, you will have two answers. Also, because it has an I, that means it will not cross the x-axis.